I have the distinct privilege and honor of introducing our speaker for this evening. Sam Brownback was sworn in as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom on February 1st, 2018, which means he's been on the job for a little more than 8 months. I assume that means he's got it all figured out. He previously served as governor of Kansas from 2011 to 2018. Prior to that, he served as a United States Senator, and he also served as a United States Representative from Kansas. He has also served as Kansas Secretary of Agriculture and was a White House Fellow in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. He's a graduate of Kansas State University and the University of Kansas School of Law. He and his wife, Mary, have 5 children. While a member of the U.S. Senate, he spent a lot of his time on the issue of religious freedom in multiple countries around the world. He was a key sponsor of the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. Prior to his public service, he was a private attorney in Kansas. He taught agricultural law at Kansas State University, and he's a co-author of 2 books on the subject. One of them, at least, is titled, appropriately enough, Kansas Agricultural Law. Well, I noticed the book's slightly jazzier subtitle is the state motto of Kansas. It's a Latin phrase, ad astra per aspera, which translates as to the stars through difficulties, or through adversities, or through hardships. And it struck me when I saw that this motto is very similar to the motto of Hillsdale College, virtus tentamine gaudet, or as we say in Hillsdale, strength rejoices in the challenge. To put it another way, these 2 mottos are in essential agreement. The things that are truly worth having or achieving in life take a lot of hard work. Our speaker's many years of devoted public service, first to his home state of Kansas and then to the nation, are a testament to his embrace of this fact. We are grateful for his service and for his presence here tonight. His topic is religious liberty and economic liberty. Please welcome to the podium Ambassador Sam Brownback.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of Hillsdale College. I've read different publications over the years from Hillsdale. They've been fabulous. You hold to truth, you fight, you defend, and you produce great graduates, too. I've got one in my office now, Malika Willoughby. Malika, stand up here and take a Hillsdale bow. She is fabulous. She carries your banner high. She argues from principle, and she argues, which I really appreciate, because I think a lot of times conservatives or people with conservative principles, too much of the time, we won't argue. We just kind of, you feel like the whole world is against you, and it's you against 10 people in the room, and I don't know if I want to argue on this right now, and they just don't argue. Well, if you don't argue, you lose. If you don't get in the fight, you lose. You got to get in the fight. You got to really get in there and defend, and I've found people from Hillsdale, they'll get in there and defend. So thank you for being in there and being willing to stand up to the challenge, particularly in a culture today that is awfully difficult to do this in, as we saw in the Kavanaugh hearing this last week and the vote. And I've been in public life a long time, and for the most of it, people are really quite civil. And you know, they may not agree with you, but they don't come up to you at a restaurant and start yelling or screaming at things. They're usually, particularly in this part of the country. But boy, it seems like that civility is really leaving the public square, and I hope you'll continue to argue. I hope you'll continue to be civil about it as well, because the civility is really needed in a democracy for it to be able to function. And And even if the other guys aren't willing to be civil, we should be civil. That just should be a basic. It should be a foundational. If you don't do it that way, and honest to goodness, this is what's going to happen before long. Every member of Congress is going to have security details. They're not going to be able to go out in public without everybody coming through some metal detector. And a lot of things, when I was a representative, representing people, we have a representative democracy. I got a lot of my input at ball games and soccer matches and the grocery store and just being out. And you'd look at polling numbers and data and everything all the time, but you got to get the human feel to it. Abraham Lincoln would call this taking a public opinion bath when he would walk around. You know, it just kind of comes on you. Well, we're going to lose that if you lose the civility. Because people are going to be forced inside fortresses like they are in a lot of third world countries where the politicians aren't out. Because they can't be. It's not safe. We don't want that. That's a terrible thing to think and have. Enough commentary on that. I get fired up about it. We had a nice big win today that I've got to really start off with, even though it's not right on point on the topic. But Andrew Brunson, a pastor from North Carolina, was released. And is flying home, maybe as we speak, even now, on an aircraft coming back to the United States. He spent 2 years in a Turkish prison. He was innocent. He was kept there by Turkey as, I think, a pawn. They wanted somebody released from here who is here on asylum that there was no grounds to send back. And they just kept, well, we want to trade this and that. We have a rule of law here. If this guy didn't do anything, you can't ship him out. And they just kept him. And then it became a bigger deal. And God bless President Trump. And a lot of people hammer at him all the time, but Erdogan, the president of Turkey, Trump kept pushing him about, you need to let this guy go. He is innocent. We are not going to trade this guy that you want for him. This guy needs to be let go. He's innocent. They kept dawdling this and that. And finally, Trump just said, okay, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to put steel and aluminum tariffs on your country. And he did it. It dropped their currency to record lows by doing it. And he said, okay, when you guys are ready to let him go, we'll talk about this. And they finally got ready to let him go. But you shouldn't have to do this. This is the first time it was ever done with a NATO ally on top of it. But God bless this president, he's willing to fight. That's what I was talking with at the outset. He's willing to fight. And that's why I'm delighted to be in a position like this. Tim mentioned the places I've had the opportunity to serve, and it's been a great opportunity, and this is a wonderful country. We are at a tough time, just in the civil discourse and the philosophy of the nation of how we're going to go or move forward or not. And it's all the more important that people like you do get in the fray and you do know why you believe what you believe. And you're willing to articulate from that position of knowledge why you do these things. And you're willing to train and teach people from that position. And so please really keep doing it. I've got a few comments that I want to make for about 10, 15 minutes, and I'd be happy to take questions and comments from people after that. I want to start from the philosophical position because that's the one that Hillsdale would start from. That is, we believe in religious freedom as a country. It's in our Constitution. It's in the First Amendment. The Founding Fathers deeply believed in this right. It was something that's in our DNA. It was a reason why a number of people came to the United States in the first place, as they were seeking religious freedom. They were seeking a place that they could establish and build off of that base to move forward. I was in Salt Lake City earlier this week, meeting with the heads of the LDS Church, and they went to Utah seeking the same thing, a place where they could establish in their own religious freedom and have that as a hallmark. It is in our DNA. It is in this place. We believe in religious freedom, but we believe in it not as a government right. We believe in it as a God-given right. This is a right you have as being a dignified human individual. As a person, you have this right from the Creator, not from government. We do not believe government has a right to interfere with this right. The government's role is to protect the right of religious freedom. It's to protect your right to believe whatever you choose, or to change that belief, or to believe in nothing at all. That is your God-given right, and government's role is to protect that right against all comers. That you have this inherent right, and it's building you as a dignified human individual. That would be the Hillsdale explanation of religious freedom from our viewpoint. It happens to also be in our Constitution. It happens to also be in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that most countries around the world signed 70 years ago. And yet, today in the world, 80% of the world's population, according to Pew, lives in a religiously restrictive atmosphere where they do not have this right to choose as they would choose. They are restricted. And I've been trying to figure out, well, why is the world this way today? And the best I can come up with is when the Berlin Wall came down, people started moving all over the world, as did ideas start moving all over the world. And they started to clash into each other at different places. Prior to the Berlin Wall coming down, okay, this is the Hindu region of the world, this is the Christian region of the world, this is the Muslim, this is the Buddhist, this is the this, kind of everybody in your place. But then after that, people started moving and they started to have more intersect of ideas. And then the political class decided, you know what, there's some value here if we favor the majority religion over the minority religion. And saying, you know, we're going to exclude the minority, or we're going to limit them, or we're going to try this or that, and we'll subtle ways or not so subtle ways. And you started getting a lot more religious restrictions put on people as this took place, to the point now we have 80% of the world having this. This administration believes this is a foundational right that is important to assure that people around the world have this, and they're willing to fight for this right. We had a ministerial earlier this year. Ministerials were foreign ministers from all over the world get together. This was the first one that's ever happened. We did it in July. This year had 84 countries present, and it was about advancing religious freedom as a fundamental right. And it's a fundamental right, as I said, that you inherently have as an individual, but we also believe it has side benefits, which are the reason for this topic tonight, is that as we look at it and as we study it and look at it, this right, if it is insured for an individual, does several other things as well. One is you'll have less terrorism if you have more religious freedom. And why is that? Well, it's in the studies that this has happened that way, but also just think about it for a couple of minutes. If you're told, we will not let you raise your children the way you want to raise those children, we're not going to let them go to church before their age of 18, you cannot go to the church you cannot go into the mosque before age of 18 of the children, you're not going to allow this or that, there'll be a number of people that would kind of go, okay, I guess I'll go along, but there will also be that group of people that will say, no. I have a right to educate my family and believe the way I want to and to train my family the way I want to see that. And they will fight you. And we find that then in the data. Without religious freedom, there is more terrorism in those countries. There's a second piece of it. We find in the data that with less religious freedom, there's less economic growth and economic opportunity. And that religious freedom brings in, and we're not sure exactly why this is, but it brings in more thought, brings in more diversity of talent into a place that there can be more economic growth. So it has a fruit there as well. And then there's a third piece to it, and this one's hard to quantify, but it's true. And I hope we start to get some economic data on this. When you have religious freedom, it releases a spiritual capital into a country. And spiritual capital I want to define and describe as that releasing of the thousands, the millions of different civic groups that have a religious bent to them, that start building schools and hospitals and daycares and doing all sorts of different things to take care of the people that are poor. I was recently in Uzbekistan. We're working with that country on religious freedom. And I was touring a couple of places of faith. And I'm leaving one of them, and there's a guy there that they introduced me to, a couple of guys that were there, and they were cleaning these grapes up. And I started talking with them, and one of the guys, he said, well, tell him your story. And he through the interpreter, he said, look, I was an alcoholic. I couldn't get back on my feet. This church took me in. I now have a faith. I am here. I'm starting to stabilize and lift up. And I used that example to the Uzbeks that I spoke to. I said, this is what I mean about the release of spiritual capital. This guy is on the street, a drunkard, without that church. But with it, he's got a life. You release the spiritual capital for this guy to be able to come forward, and that happens in millions of cases around the world. But if you're a religiously restrictive country, you limit that spiritual capital from being released in the nation. And so we push that with countries as well. This next year, we will do another religious freedom summit of nations. We'll invite people and civic groups from all over the world to come. This last year, we had over 500 individuals, most representing different civic groups or faith-based groups. I think we'll triple the size this next year because there's just this inherent, there's an untapped group here. There's a pent-up demand for this. There's no international body that deals with religious disputes. We have them on trade. We have them on military. We have them on routes. We have them on how you divvy up space. There's no international body that deals with religious disputes. Religions can be a very powerful force for good. They can also be things that end up being used for ill. And I'm saying we're going to create an international body, and I don't think we should. But we need to create a dialogue. We need governments to look at this as saying the role of government is to protect the right. It's not to pick a winner or loser in faith. That to see the inherent dignity of an individual as they move forward. So that's what we are doing. That's what this administration is going to fight for. That's what we're going to push as we go along. And unfortunately, we see many places around the world where this is just not the case. I want to give you a couple of examples. I've got another thought I want to put out, and then I'll close. We see in China, and we're unfortunately seeing this happen in a very aggressive way now, where for a long period of time, several decades, the Chinese were opening up more and more to outside world. There was this really kind of this Deng Xiaoping philosophy of not being hardcore on the communist ideology, but more, I take it as really being centrally described as his statement associated with him, that it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, it's whether it catches mice. So there's this nature of just being, pragmatic. And they were opening up and allowing different religions to operate, Muslims and Falun Gong and Buddhists and Christians. It was growing fast as a Christian nation, and by some numbers, it was going to be the largest Christian nation in the world in 20 years. But that is all being shut down. Pick up some of the recent international stories of what's happening to the Uyghur population. It's a Muslim population in the western part of China. Some of you may have seen the cover stories in Economist magazine or the New York Times and other places. They say in these stories up to 1 million people in re-education camps because of them being Muslims. They've got a big data system that has Big Brother running it and facial recognition cameras all over the place in major Uyghur towns, to where they see an individual. They see if they walk into a mosque. It immediately identifies the individual. If you go in twice in a week, it limits other places that you're allowed to go in this country. This is Big Brother using big data, artificial intelligence to subdue a population. The guy that runs this is the same guy that did basically cultural genocide over Tibet. And what he did with the Buddhist population. The Communist Party chairman over Tibet was moved to the Muslim region of the world. We're looking at this, and I'm looking at it, and to me it's one of the most, if not the most concerning religious freedom situation in the world, because it's the future. If the Chinese perfect this system, what will keep them from selling it to other authoritarian regimes in different places around the world and say, if you want to put down a restive population, we got the system for you. And it sounds eerily like some of the futuristic books that people would talk about on having these sort of big data police states that you can read about. To me, it's deeply concerning. We see this situation in Iran today. If you are of the minority faith, you get run out. You can get executed. The regime executed at least 20 individuals for one thing last year, their religious beliefs and how they practice them. If you're Baha'i, the persecution is relentless. If you're of the wrong Islamic faith, the persecution continues. And I can take you to different regions of the world. Burma, the Rohingya population is dominantly Muslim being run out by dominantly Buddhist in the country. Not the only factor, but yet a main one. What we want to see happen is instead of more persecution, more discrimination, and more restrictions, we firmly believe that the gates of religious freedom should fly open around the world, that the Iron Curtain withholding religious freedom should come down so that people are free to exercise this right that most nations have actually agreed to, but few actually practice. It's in our founding, it's in our future, and we believe it'll be something of great help. I want to close with a recognition of what Hillsdale College to me means in this country, and I've had the great honor to be a public servant in this nation for a number of years. You've been one of the real bellwethers. You've been one of the real philosophical trainers. And I look around the room, and I think if you're going to be the philosophical trainer for one of the major philosophies, governing philosophies in this country of 320 million people, or whatever we are, shouldn't this room be at least double the size? Shouldn't it be much bigger? But yet, I find in most movements in the United States, most serious movements, the core of it's relatively small. But it's philosophical. It believes in it. It's willing to fight. You're the Marines of the philosophy. I've got a son that's a Marine. That doesn't give me the right to say it, but I did. I love your motto, pursue truth, defend liberty, as key ones, and you've done that, and keep doing it, please. In this time of such difficulty and division in this nation, we need you out there. We need you to be happy about it, too. The other side can be dour and mean. I want to be a happy warrior. I want to be out there fighting because I believe in this principle, and I'm happy I'm in the fight. I could be out selling shoes, and instead I get to be a warrior in a big fight that's important for a lot of people around the world, and you are too. You're in this fight. And if America doesn't stand for these principles, nobody else around the world will. Nobody else will fight for them. So it makes it all the much more of a big burden on us to defend these things. And they work. They work. This is a complete aside, but as governor of Kansas, I signed 19 pro-life bills because I believe that that a young human is a person and not a piece of property. And it is. And you can say, okay, well, you signed 19 pro-life bills. Yeah, there were 17,000 fewer abortions during that 6-year time period that I was governor. There are people alive today because of that philosophy. There are people alive today because of the philosophical truths you push that are actually alive. Actually alive. You got to fight. You got to push forward. Pray for this nation. Pray for our future. Pray for this president. I pray for every president. I prayed for Barack Obama almost every night, even though I disagreed with him vehemently. But I hope you do, and stand there on those God-given principles that have made this nation, have made this world, and wherever they have operated in this world, they have made those nations great. And you're starting to see some countries return back to them. I was just in Poland, moving back towards those philosophies, and not that they don't have some problems. Final thought, and then I'll open up questions. I met recently with a guy with Oxford Analytica, and some of you will be familiar with their materials that they put out. They put out real high-quality thoughts and analysis on key problems and questions of the day. And I was asking him, I said, one thing that I would ask you to think about is, would you also put in your analysis when you do in certain areas, and maybe it doesn't apply to all fields, would you put in there a spiritual analysis to the problem? Would you put in there a thought about, okay, what's the spiritual nature of this problem, and what's the answer? And get your great thinkers that you bring together from around the world into address this. I was in a meeting, I want to give you an example of this. 2 days ago, I was in a meeting with a series of other ambassadors from Europe, and they were talking about the problems in this country and where this group of people is treated wrong because there was a problem that happened 50 years ago, or these people were killed by that group of people, and the problem keeps being re-energized and brought back up in the latest generation. And I said, well, why don't we ever deal with the root of the problem? I pointed out that when I was governor of Kansas, when I was in the U.S. Senate, I carried a bill in the U.S. Senate and got passed into law to apologize for broken treaties that we had with Native Americans, to acknowledge that we broke some of these treaties, and we were specific with it, and said, and we shouldn't have, and this was wrong. And you say, okay, well, why'd you do that? Well, because if you look at there's my specific example of it, is western Kansas. We've got an aquifer under western Kansas. It's called the Ogallala Aquifer. We've been overusing it for years and are about to drain it for being able to agricultural use. And you go out and you talk with farmers, why are you overusing it? Well, because I'm going to use all the water I can, and then when it's all done, I'll just move to dryland farming and take the profits I took from irrigation and buy more dryland farming, and that's my analysis. And you go, well, that's so short-sighted for the future and for your kids and your grandkids. And yeah, but it's the way we got to go. Well, what was really happening was you had a sin of greed over the land. Sin follows the land, is what it says biblically. So until you deal with that, well, where did the greed come from? Well, we'd stolen the land off of the Native Americans. We hadn't dealt fairly with them until we went and apologized, and we did. And a group of great Christian people with a number of Native Americans, and they went through a series of ceremonies and apologies and acknowledging this taking place. And to where a number of the Native American leaders are saying, okay, it's dealt with, we're done. Now you can go out there and you can find farmers aggressively pursuing sustainable use of the water, saying, I want to preserve this for future generations. We can cut this back down because the greed, the sin of greed that had followed the land has been lifted. It's been dealt with. And there are people that don't have a box for that sort of discussion, and I respect that. But why do the problems keep going on and we never solve them? Maybe we should think about things this way from time to time. Maybe our founders thought of things this way, because you know they did. These were people that looked at the grid this way. And yet we as a society, I've got this great mind, and I got this great computer, we'll just fix it that way. And the problems don't get fixed. We don't ever go back to the basics. You got to deal with it the way God set the problem up. Amen. We got to do it. Thank you. God bless you all. Let me attempt to take comments, questions, I guess, I don't know how you guys do it, but they told me to take questions, and I'm happy to try. And I have found my favorite title. A lot of people ask me, well, would you like being a senator or governor better, or this or that? I've got my favorite title, Grandpa. I've got 3 grandchildren. I'm expecting a 4th, and those are awesome.
Thank you again for your service to our country and for your talk this evening. My question has to do with, where does religion and responsibility intersect? Now, as you know, for years we have been more on a Christian biblical standard. Where do we get our standards if everyone is allowed to do what is right in his own eyes or his own religion? One of the reasons why we say that taking land from the Indians was wrong, because we had promised and we violated our word. Keeping your word is one of the big problems we have in our society today. That's one of the reasons we have so much debt. You know, if people would think more about the importance of keeping their word, they would be less likely to borrow. And I dare say our nation the same thing. So the Bible speaks strongly about that. We are made in God's image, and God never breaks his word. So again, the point I'm making here is it's nice to say freedom of religion, but you got to be careful, because otherwise everybody is allowed to do what he thinks his religion allows, and he'll say whatever he's of a religious nature, whatever satisfies his own desires. So I'd like you to comment on that. Where do we get our standards of right and wrong? And is there a history in our nation about one religion being dominant in terms of those standards? Thank you.
Yeah, how to get at that one? Well, let me just do it this way. Remember, the founders, they provided a huge amount of freedom. They believed in freedom and liberty. It's a big piece of what they saw here. And they saw a limited government with its role being specified, and a broad right for the individual. And then the individual would do self-governance. And they would talk often about the need for faith or religion within the individual because the government's role was limited. And I believe they did this off the design of the way God created us. God created us with this liberty, this incredible freedom, and he had to know when he did it that we would mess it up. And then he'd have to clean it up then, and did. So, but there must be something powerful in the notion of freedom and liberty. Must be something incredibly powerful in that God would invest in us something that he would have to pay so much to clean up, but it was still so powerful. Well, that's what I see ours is on freedom of religion. And that's why I think they built it in the Constitution the way they did, is that you have this freedom. And it is yours, and it's yours from God. These rights come from God. They don't come from us. But our role is to protect the right. But then we hope that there'll be lots of people out in the society that will have the self-governance within them. Because that's the way the system was founded. That's the way it was, as I look and see, that it was designed. So, you can say, all right, well, how are you doing on that today? Well, okay, we got difficulties. I still don't want to move away from the design. Maybe then we should have more people saying, well, then I need to get much more serious about my faith. I need to be out there in the public square with it. That's the way I'd try to answer it.
Thank you very much for your service in behalf of religious freedom. My question is, what tool in the American foreign policy playbook do you think is not being used enough to help China respect the religious freedom of its own citizens?
We're in a trade dispute with China now. I don't think that's news to anybody here. I'm a free trader, and I think we should have engaged the Chinese on trade dispute a decade ago. They've been working the system. They've been stealing intellectual property. They've been mercantilist in currency. And I think we should have been fighting with them a long time ago. It's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of this president. The guy will act. He'll do something. And this is a complete sidebar, but this group would appreciate this. I tried for a dozen years to get our embassy moved to Jerusalem. And everybody would say, no, it's going to blow the world up. There'll be all this fighting that'll take place. And I said, no, you'll have a weekend of protests and it'll be over. President Trump comes in, boom, just do it. Move the embassy. It's moved. There was a weekend of protest, and it's there. That's what I love about this guy. I think and here's this is Sam Brownback thought, okay? So this isn't administration policy. But I think there'd be general agreement with it in the administration. The Chinese government is holding itself up now as saying we have a legitimate system that other governments should follow around the world. You don't have to follow this free market democracy system that everybody's saying, yeah, you got to go free market democracy, free market democracy. No, you don't have to. You can be a one-party rule, mercantilist, lack of human rights, and this is a legitimate global system that other countries should follow and consider for their own path because it may fit them. This is the China third way or other way. I think we ought to be pointing out, in particular, the lack of human rights under that model. The lack of human rights, the lack of the dignity of the individual under that model. I think we ought to be pressing them hard. Okay, this is your model. How does that apply if you decide to be a person of faith and you want to have that religious freedom? What do you get to have? And I think it's one of the very strengths of our argument is to argue on the basis of human rights. And I think that's something and you're seeing this come forward. The Vice President gave a speech last week on China noting this. The situation's getting much clearer, I think, and I hope we continue to emphasize those. We had a debate here at this table, friendly discussion about how Reagan used human rights. You think about it, he advocated for the Soviet Jews to be able to leave and the evangelicals to be able to leave out of the Soviet Union. He goes to Gorbachev, he goes to the Berlin Wall that was on their country and their territory, and what's he point out? He points out that the wall was built there to keep people in, not to keep people out. That's why, well, why do you build a wall to keep people in? Well, because you got a horrible system that people would love to get out of. They got a human right. And then he says, in those powerful words that created so much, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall. He didn't have a tank or a dozer anywhere around. He had tanks around. He didn't have any dozers anywhere around to move that. That wall came down that day. And he gave people hope. And that's why you use human rights. I can take you to people that have been in jail for 10 years. I can take you to North Korean individuals that when the United States starts talking about human rights for North Koreans, they heard it. They were in a little village in a rural area in North Korea, and it gave them hope. And they started fighting because they started agitating more because somebody actually heard their plight. And it's the strength of who we are. If you would meet with some of the people that I meet with and hear how the Yazidis were treated by ISIS in northern Iraq, this is a religious minority, a tiny religious philosophy that they center around this one mountain, Sinjar Mountain. But the ISIS people said, these are demon worshipers, therefore they deserve to die a horrible death. The women deserve to be trafficked. I met with women that were trafficked, that were sold 7, 10 times. I met with a woman who had a 15-year-old mentally retarded child beat out of her hands, taken from her, and her sold 7 times. And why? Well, because this person thinks you've got a bad religion. And that entitled them, in their thought and philosophy, to take this 15-year-old mentally retarded child out of your hands. That's wrong.
With the recent release of Andrew Brunson, was that something your office was directly involved in, and could you give us more information about that?
Yes, we were. But we were involved. The president did this. The president got this done. He raised it often with the president of Turkey, of Erdogan. He raised it insistently. And when Erdogan wouldn't respond, he slapped him with tariffs. I've not seen another president that would have done that. So yes, we advocated and raised it consistently in every place we possibly could. The president got this done. Hey, thanks. Yes, thank you. You got a microphone there.
Thank you. In the position that you have now, is it possible that you can work at all to put God back in our schools?
Not from this position. the bill that created this position, this was created by Congress and pushed, and we specifically excluded domestic religious freedom issues from it because even then, 20 years ago, these were starting to really divide the population of the United States. So we wouldn't have had much, if any, Democrat support for the bill at that time. It was primarily religious conservatives that were pushing the bill because we were just seeing all this religious persecution really gaining strength around the world. But we specifically excluded domestic religious freedom issues, which are basically starting to divide into one of two camps. The limiting camp wants us to be freedom of worship. So you're free to do whatever you want to in your house of worship, but not outside of it. And the other looks at it as a freedom of religion, which means you're a person and you've decided that you have a faith and you're free to take that faith wherever you go in public and express and be that as long as it doesn't harm another individual. You know, for as far as you can't punch another individual because my faith says you can. You can't do that, but otherwise you're free to take that. So it's really that decision about freedom of worship, very limiting of this right, to freedom of religion, very expansive right. And now the Supreme Court's taken these cases up. They've taken a couple of cases up, and I'm sure they're going to take more up because this is really one of those foundational issues that the society and the culture needs decisions on. And that's why this last election cycle was so important about that. You had 2 judges on the Supreme Court that are going to be deeply involved. And remember, for me and as conservatives, we believe these basic rights are very broad-based. Even if you don't like some of it, like in the First Amendment, I don't like pornography, but I believe in a very expansive Bill of Rights. And you just, okay, then that's what we stand for, because that's philosophically, we believe in these. I believe if the First Amendment's an expansive right, so is the Second Amendment. It's not a limiting right. You got to have a consistency in your definitions. Well, you're going to see these rights be significantly taken up by the court and continue to, because it's just such a big issue in the society. Let me take one question more, and I'll let you roll. There's a guy back here or something. Yes. There you go. Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador. I just had a question, because you've talked a number of times about expanding religious freedom. But what about where you have particular traditions or faith systems that are completely incompatible with existence for other systems? Like, for instance, ISIS trying to bring back the medieval caliphate, or in London, for instance, the ever-expanding religious freedom led to the establishment of a judge system in Sharia law in certain areas that led to the oppression of their own people. So you have an expanding religious freedom, and at the same time, certain incompatible systems that oppress their own people. So how do you negotiate those things? Yeah,
one, as I mentioned, that you can't use your religious freedom right to punch somebody else or kill somebody else. That is a clear limitation on it, and that should be. The other one I'd point out, and we've got a big debate going on in this country. While I was governor of Kansas, I signed a bill that said the Constitution of the United States is the law of the land for the state of Kansas, and we don't recognize any other laws that come in to the state that are not based on the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of Kansas. Well, we had people that were protesting about, well, this was just designed to limit Sharia law from coming into Kansas. And I said, no, this is about defending the Constitution, because that's where our rights that we have limited as a country, set up as a country, is in this set of rights. And it limits any other piece that comes in, because ours is built on this Constitution. We're a rule of law nation. Well, and I think that would apply to the same situation there, that our law is based on the Constitution. That Constitution has its philosophical basis, and I think that's the way that I would handle and look at those sets of issues. Again, thank you. You've been very kind to let me speak to you of a group that I've admired so long. Stay in this fight. If you're a supporter of this group, help them out. If you're a teacher, don't ever lose your philosophical basis. And thank you for being willing. If you're a college, university, or campus teacher, thank you for standing up for basic rights and another philosophy that may be that less dominant on your campus. It seems like our campuses are all dominated hard on the left anymore. And if you're standing up there, thank you for giving that diversity of thought out there, which I always thought universities were supposed to be all about. But anymore, it seems like we're just getting so much more narrow on what we allow to be taught. And then the route forward for so many people is to not allow a debate, is to shout you down, that if you have a different philosophy, you're not entitled to speak. Well, that's wrong. That's not the way this country operates. And keep speaking. Keep standing up, and you're probably going to get bricks thrown at you and lots of difficulties, but keep standing up. One final story I want to share with you, because I think this really describes where I feel like a lot of philosophical conservatives are anymore. Mother Teresa was going door to door before she was a well-known figure in India, and she was collecting money because she needed it for her orphanage and for her home for the dying. And so she's going door to door to try to get money in Calcutta, which I can't imagine she raised much money that way, but she was hard up, I guess, and so she was doing that. She goes and knocks on this one guy's door, and a friend of mine saw this happen. She knocks on the door, and she's asking for money, and the guy saw her habit that she had on, and he spit in her face because he didn't believe in her and what she did, and spit in her face. She took it, wiped the spit off, and she said, okay, that's for me. I accepted. I need some money for the children. And he gave her some money. And I always thought, of sorts, that's what it can be like at times. You feel like you're standing up and you just get spit in the face. But you're saying, look, wait, I know this is the right thing. This is truth. I'm standing for truth. I'm defending truth. Why am I getting spit on? Well, it may not be for you. Maybe that's for your humility. It's actually for the kids. It's for the next generation. It's for the people that follow us. And if we don't stand, nobody will. So take it as a humbling thing that happens to you. There's no humility without humiliation, a friend of mine once said. I don't know if I like that or not, but humility is a good thing. Keep standing. Keep fighting.